In this NetEdit 1.1 tutorial, I will show you how to change configurations using NetEdit. We'll create a new configuration plan, we'll edit the configuration, we'll validate syntax and semantics, we'll deploy the changes, we'll validate the changes, and we will commit the changes. We'll start at the devices page. As you can see, I've already selected two of my 8320s, and these two devices already have some configuration on them, but what I will do is I will create another VLAN, and I will add the VLAN interface with an IP address. This simple operation covers several of the different aspects of the editor, and it will allow us to highlight what to do at each step. So once I have selected my devices, I can go to Action, and I can say Edit Running Config. I will have to create a plan. I will call it VLAN, let's say 85. In the description, I could put something about VLAN 85. As you can see, I have these plan attributes. They are optional, and you can use them. I find that a good practice. If your organization has a change ID policy, you can enter the change ID here, and then you can put whoever approved this change. And also, finally, you have a state of the project. So remember, a plan is a project and vice versa. So in this case, I'm going to assign a state of in progress. But remember, these states, you have to change them manually. NetEdit will not change them as you add and remove or as you create plans and complete the plans. So I'm going to say that this is in progress, and I will show you more about how to update the state once you complete the plan. So I'm going to say create. And this is our editor. As you can see, it has three panels. A device list panel on the left, the editor itself in the middle, and on the right side, it has this insights panel that I will get back to later. As for the editor, you see that you have here the configuration, but actually what you're seeing here is the configuration of two devices at once. So for example, how do you know that you have two devices here? Let's go here to line 10. You see that the router ID for the OSPF protocol has a generic number, but it has a background that is blue. So that tells you that there's something different about that particular parameter. So I'm going to put my cursor on it, and I see that I have two different router IDs, and that each one of the devices that I have in my list here on the left side has its own router ID. So that shows me that everything that is the same and common to both devices has the default black background, and whatever is different has a blue background. If I had a command, a full line, that exists only on one of these devices, then in that case I would see the whole line with a blue background, and on the right side of that line I would see on which device or devices that line exists. So that allows me to see everything in a single editor pane. So let's do what we came here to do, which is to create VLAN 85. As you can see, as I type, I get help. And for example, this is telling me that I can create a single VLAN or a range of VLANs. So what I will do here is say 85, and I will hit enter. We will create now the VLAN interface. Start interface, and as I type, I get help, as you can see down here, and I could use that hitting tab or by clicking on this word. And now I'm going to hit enter and pay attention to what happens here. You see that I'm in row 19. If I hit enter, that VLAN interface moved from row 19 to row 76. This is very important because this is something that will be required when I do the validation of this configuration. For the validation process to work, the sequence of the different commands and context is very important. Again, here in this context, I get context help, so the next line can start with IP. Notice that I indented after the line in which I have the interface VLAN 85, and that is the way that NetEdit realizes that this command belongs to that particular context. So I'm going to add the IP address. I'm going to say 10.85.85.1/24. Sorry. And now you know that I'm applying this configuration to two different devices. So having the same IP address for both will not work. So I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to show you how to change that. I'm going to put my cursor on that particular address, and it shows me that I have the IP address on both. So I'm going to click on that. Right click on it, and I get this form. In the form, I have one box for each device, so I will keep the address .1 for the first device, but I'm going to say that this one is 85.2/24. So now my IP address for this VLAN interface changed from a specific address to a generic one. But when I put the cursor on the generic IP address, I see the two instances of that parameter. So there's one instance for each device. With this, we have covered how we enter commands that are common to both devices, and we have covered also how we manage parameters in those commands that differ from one device to another. Finally, I'm going to show you one more thing, and it is what happens if I have a line that belongs to only one device. To do that, I'm going to deselect one of the devices on the left. By the way, I don't know if you noticed that since we started editing, we got these two diamonds here in the devices list. That means that the configuration that you see in the editor differs from the one that was on the devices before we started this plan. So I'm now selecting only one device, and let's see if I create, let's say, VLAN 86. Now that it seems that everything is normal, but let me reselect that device. As I mentioned before, this line only belongs to that first device. And the way I know this is because I have first a blue background, and second, on the right side, it tells me what device this command in particular is on. If I had many devices here and this command were on more than one, I would have here a note that said 2 out of 4, 3 out of 5, etc. So I'm going to remove this because I don't need this line, but I wanted to show you what happened if you have a line that belongs to a single device, or on the other hand, what happens if you open your editor and you see that there are lines that are with this blue background. So as we saw when we typed, there is help with the syntax. That same process is monitoring what you're typing and not only giving you assistance, but it's also verifying or validating the syntax. And if you type something wrong, it will tell you that something is not acceptable. So that is what we call syntax validation. That only checks the consistency and the syntax of one command, one line. But if we want to validate more than that, if we want to validate that, for example, I create a VLAN interface and I want to make sure that the VLAN exists, and if I enter many commands during one plan, I may make a mistake. I may refer to something that doesn't exist, and then that is more than syntax. That is something that the syntax validation will not notice. So NetEdit offers that type of validation also, and that is what you will get by clicking on this validate button at the top right of the editor panel. So what happens here? I'm going to click on this, and while the validation runs, I'm going to tell you what is happening in the background. So I'm clicking here, and NetEdit sent the configuration to each one of my two devices. So you can see the validation passed without errors, and we're good. However, let me tell you what happened. Each one of the devices took this configuration and took its own state database, created a copy of the relevant parts of that database to validate the configuration, took the configuration that it received from NetEdit via a REST call, and applied line by line of the configuration to see if each line is valid, not only in relationship with itself in terms of syntax, but also in relationship with the hardware configuration, with the software version, and with all the lines above that particular command. So that validation can only be done by the device. NetEdit could not do this on its own. So this is why this is so critical. This validation button allows you to make sure that the configuration is applicable to that hardware with that software and with everything else in that same configuration file. So now we're ready to keep going. What we're going to do is take one more step before we deploy this. I'm going to show you something interesting. If you go here to views, you will see that you have the editor view, which is the one that we were working on, but you also have this diff view. Let me click on this and let me show you what you will find here. On the left hand, you have the configuration as it looked before you started the plan. On the right side, you have that same configuration but with all the changes. For example, under line 17, we had a space here on the left hand, but on the right side, we added a line there, and that is VLAN 85. So now if I navigate down, I will find my VLAN interface, exactly the same. If instead of creating something new, I change something, for example, if I had changed the IP address on this interface, I would see the same line on the left hand, but in red. And the same would happen if I'm deleting something. I would have it in red on the left, and I would have a blank space on the right. So this is very interesting because this shows me exactly what changes I've made. The other important thing of this particular view is that in the editor view, you had both devices at once. Here, you're seeing only one device. And you can move from one device to the other by clicking on this pull-down menu or by using these next and previous buttons here at the bottom of your screen. So I can see here both of my devices one at a time, so I see exactly what I have for each one of my devices. So I'm going to go back to my editor view, and now I'm ready to deploy. To deploy, I have to go to the plan dashboard, and I'm going to do that by clicking on this return to plan. This is the dashboard, and it's the first time we visit this. This is the plan dashboard. So you have plan details here, you have some actions that you can perform, which is basically editing the plan attributes. I have here the attributes as they look right now. Then on the right side at the top, I have the deployment status. It says that 0 devices have been deployed, or the configuration has been deployed to 0 devices. Or in other words, if you look at the pending state here, it says 2 pending, 0 in progress, 0 deployed, 0 committed, 0 failed, etc. Then you have this box in the middle that has 2 rows, the edit and the deployed row. You have the list of your devices, and at the bottom, as always, you have all the logs that belong to this particular plan. So all the information on the steps that happen to this particular plan are right here. So let's go back to the main part of this page, which is this block in the middle, and you see that you have the edit button and the deploy button. The options that you see at the right of each one of these buttons, the reason they're there is because they're related to that button. For example, device validation. By the way, device validation here includes syntax validation, because if you don't pass, if you have a syntax error, you won't be able to do the device validation. Conformance validation, we'll talk about this in a different tutorial. I'll not spend time on that right now. It is a big topic and it deserves more detail. So, if I want to go back to my editor, I will click on Edit. Now, because I'm ready, I'm going to say Deploy. When I click on Deploy, notice that the change validation here, it's saying not run. We haven't talked about change validation, but I will show you after the deployment is completed what that is about. But let me give you a hint. The change validation is a list of show commands, and that is configurable, and we will get to that configuration in another tutorial, but for now let's say the following. That list of show commands is going to be run before and after the deploy. So when you click on deploy, deploy will first check that the device validation has been successful, and it will start the change validation. So it will run all the show commands, and after that, and it will record the output of those show commands. There, you can also have pings, trace routes, etc., but you cannot obviously have there commands that will change the configuration. That is where NetEdit comes into play. So the other thing is that is the only operation in which NetEdit uses SSH to reach and to talk to the devices. So after the configurations have been applied and the deployment is getting to its completion, the show commands are run again. So you will be able to compare the output of those show commands once you have the deployment complete. So let me click on deploy. Let me confirm, and let's see what happens. While this is happening, let's go back to the device validation and conformance validation. I said that device validation is not, so will prevent you from deploying if it fails. That is not the case with conformance validation, because conformance validation is basically telling you if you're missing something in your configuration. And you could have in your list of things to do to create all those configurations to comply with the conformance tests in the next plan. So the fact that you are not conforming with your policies right now is just a warning. It's telling you, hey, please configure to add this in the future. So we'll see that this is still in progress. By the way, notice that the edit and deploy buttons are now inactive. They have been deactivated during this process. When we get back from the deployment, you will see that the edit button will change and the deploy button will remain gray, so deactivated. The edit button will be, at that point, changed into view. So it will say view, and if you click on that, you will go back to the editor, but in read-only mode. The deploy button will stay gray, but you'll find new buttons in the space between deploy and change validation. In particular, you will see two buttons, one that says commit and the other one that says roll back. So you will have the chance to roll back and return to the previous configuration. That is basically removing the configuration from the switches and returning them to the previous state. Or committing. Committing basically means copying the running configuration to the startup config. In other words, it's the same as running the command write mem. How do you decide if you want to roll back or you want to commit? You click on change validation, you compare the state or the output of the show commands before and after the deployment, and you check if the changes are the ones you expected. If there's something wrong in the output, you will roll back. If everything looks fine, you will commit. What happens if you roll back? If you roll back, the view button goes back to edit button. So you can go back to the editor and make the necessary changes. If you click commit, the view button stays the same, but the deploy button also stays grayed out. So once you commit, this plan is closed, finished, and locked. So that is very important. Once you have committed a plan, there is no way to roll it back or to go to the editor and make any further changes. If you need to make more changes, you have to create a new plan. So, as I said before, once the deployment finishes, you see a few differences in this dashboard. First, in the deployment status here at the top right, you see that now it says 2 deployed instead of 2 pending. And then you see that, again, you have 2 deployed, 0 pending, 0 in progress, 0 failed, etc. And it also says that 0 have been committed. And then in the devices list, it tells you that the deployment was successful and that everything seems right. So before we decide between rolling back and committing, let's go and look at the change validation and see what happened. These are the change validation results. It doesn't seem much when you look at this here, but see at the right you have all the commands, the show commands that we had prepared for this. These are basically the default commands. So let me go here and say show interface brief, and because I have a green arrow here on the left side, that means that something changed. The before and after output of this command will be different for this particular device. I have the same command for the other device somewhere below. So everything seems the same for the ports, but when I get to the VLAN interfaces, I see that I have a new VLAN interface here called 85. It says that it's enabled, but it also says that it's down, because of course, I haven't added any ports to this VLAN, so, or I haven't added this VLAN to any ports. So if there are no ports on the VLAN, or there are no, even if you have ports, the ports are all shut down, the VLAN interface will stay down. To say OK, I'm happy with the changes here, so instead of rolling back, I'm going to say commit. And I'm confirming, it's committing the changes. And while this happens, say 1 committed, 2 committed, I'm ready. Deploy, commit, and rollback buttons are disabled, and I can go now to action and update my attributes. Here's where I can go and say state complete. And then I say save. Now I know that my attributes are up to date, that my plan is closed, it's completed, and there's nothing more I need to do with this plan. Before we finish here, let me go back to one of my devices. I'm going to just select the device here and go to the device details. And now this is what happened when I applied this plan. If you look at the right side, you see the plan name, you see the plan description, you see that it was modified by me, user 1, conformance at deploy was passed, and then when it was modified. This is very important because now you see that each one of these boxes contains all the information you need for auditing these plans. So this stays in NetEdit. So in the future, you can move from one of these boxes to the other to see what changes were made and what happened. So let's go back to our devices list. And now the final thing is that you see here some devices, the current revision says 1, in the other one it says 2, and the other one says 3. This is the number of those boxes in the revision history list. So with that, we completed this tutorial. We will dig deeper into each one of the steps that we took, especially in the validation process. Each one of the 4 validation types will be described in detail in a different tutorial. Thank you.